Hey, welcome to Adobe Character Animator Tips and Tricks. This is for February 2017. My name is Dave, part of the Adobe Character Animator team, and today we're going to start out with the Community Spotlight, which includes a movie critic pig, a guy and his puppet teaching you Spanish with a guitar, and the world's dumbest scientist made out of clay. So, 3 very cool examples that we'll run through. Then we'll talk about the eyes. Why do you put things in a right or left eye folder? What are the blue and yellow tags? What do they mean? What is left pupil size? All of these different things. So by the end of it, hopefully you'll become an expert on how the eyes work. Then we'll talk about how to have a character interact with an object. How can you have an object like a box or a coffee mug or a sword and have a character pick it up off a table and interact with it? And I'll show you exactly how to do that. We'll run through a few small things such as how to add multiple dangle points for physics, how to make sure your audio tracks are as loud and clear as possible for the best lip sync results. And then finally, we will end with a new feature request board where you can submit and vote on the best new ideas to be added into future versions of Character Animator. So that's a lot to get through, so let's get started. A theme that I'm starting to see a lot more on YouTube are people who are making basically themed character channels. You're creating a character animator puppet or a cast of characters, and then you put them together on these daily or weekly or monthly installments doing something in particular. In this case, Brad Pig is a pig who does movie reviews. And it's all in Spanish, so unfortunately I can't understand most of it, but it's really well done and very fluid characters. And I really like the 2.5D parallax they've got going on, kind of with the nose and the mouth moving around. And this is a good example of using dynamic link with After Effects. There's a lot of different camera shots, and there's kind of this handheld camera look that the camera's always kind of moving. So it's really cool to see all this. And the impressive thing is they're able to churn out about one of these a week. Normally you would just see a talking head, talking just a person giving their movie reviews, but for this, they're able to do these little skits and bring in extra characters and do some extra things that only cartoons can do. And it's really impressive how fast they can churn these out and still maintain a very high quality level. So Brad Pig, very, very cool stuff. And speaking of learning Spanish, I should probably spend some more time on Senior Jordan's channel. This guy's got over 100,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel, and he's doing a great job of teaching Spanish in a very simple and friendly and approachable and funny way. And he's doing this through Character Animator. He animates himself and other characters and teaches these lessons. And, learning a new language can be pretty intimidating. And I think anything you can do to make things feel more approachable and fun is worth it. And in this case, the cartoons definitely help do that. So it's a really well done channel. And I've learned a few new things from watching a few of the episodes. And our last example this month comes to us again from David Taub, who you may remember from last month did the grandfather character talking about the Nutcracker in kind of this claymation style. Well, he's back this month with this other character called the dumbest scientist in the world. And he was kind enough to give me more of a behind the scenes of how he did this. So one of the things he did was he basically sculpted all these individual parts out of Sculpey, the modeling clay that you can use. And then he photographed them individually, all these different parts, and then merged them all together in Photoshop. And he said this was really helpful because, the clay can crack and get smudges and some weird, things in it. And in Photoshop, he was just able to, clone stamp those out and get rid of those and make it look as smooth as perfect as possible, whereas in a traditional stop motion shoot, those things would have to be fixed to make sure that everything stays consistent from shot to shot. So it helped save him a lot of time and get this kind of claymation look working well for him. And then one other really interesting detail that he said is that, in the last one we said how doing things at 12 frames per second, so if you go to your scene here and then go over to your frame rate, at 12 frames per second really gives you kind of that stilted stop motion style, and that works really well. But he said for the lip sync, he found that it wasn't interacting as quickly as he wanted at 12 frames per second. So actually what he did was film just the character without the mouth at 12 frames per second, and then hid everything else and just did the mouth at 24 frames per second, and then brought that into After Effects as a dynamic link file with everything at 24 frames per second. And so the 12 was basically doubled, and the mouth was looking very fluid and fast at 24 frames per second. So just a little tip if you're looking for that very precise lip sync, but still getting kind of that stilted claymation style. So awesome work as usual, David. Thank you so much for sharing all this behind the scenes stuff. And I'm going to go buy some Sculpey from Amazon right now. All right, this is a pretty common issue. You have a puppet and you have an object on a table or something you want your character to interact with, maybe a pencil or a weapon or a ball or a coffee mug or something like that. You want them to pick it up with their hands. Currently, we don't have any magnet or sticky powers in the hands to grab things with, but you can kind of do this bait and switch behind the scenes to make things disappear in one spot and appear in another. And then if you're quick enough with the animation, you can do something like this, where I pick a box up and put it back down. And all I'm doing is just pressing the B key to switch between where this box is appearing and have the hand actually look like it's in a grab position. But if I do the animation quick enough, it looks like it's all one continuous motion. So let's dig into the puppet panel and see exactly how to set this up. So the first thing you might notice here is I've got my character with its head and its body, but then I've also got completely separate from that at the top of my PSD file, this folder, this group called table. And so this is a separate foreground element from my character, and I'm keeping it in the same PSD, the same puppet file, because I want my character to directly interact with it. And so you can do this sort of thing. Just don't tag it with stuff like head or eyes or mouth or anything like that, and you should be okay. So in this case, I've got a table, and inside there I've got a group called box. And box has two states. The default one is box, and it shows that cardboard box. But then I've also got an empty layer called none, and that, as the name suggests, has absolutely nothing inside of it. It's just a blank layer. And I've triggered that by selecting it, and over here under the trigger section, making the key B, so when I press the B key, it's going to change, and then hide others in group, which means hide that box and instead show this empty layer. So by default, it's going to show that, and then when I press B, it's going to disappear. So let's turn this off for now, just to show the hand a little bit more. And what's happening here is inside the group, the arm group, inside my hand, the character's left hand, I have a layer that's hidden by default, which is basically just an artwork layer that shows kind of this rectangle on the side, making it look like his claw is holding the box, and then the exact same box, the exact same shape, width, height, all that stuff in this layer. And this is also key triggered with B. So I've selected this, and then I've gone over here and selected B. Now I don't want to hide others in group here because the other things in this group are the claw and the rest of the arm. And so if I did that, it would hide the entire arm, and I don't want to do that. So all I want to do is track this with B. Now, one interesting thing to note here is the orientation of the box as I'm moving it. So if I did things just like this, so let's turn the box back on up here, back to its original state, and go back into our example. And so now if I press B, I'll pick it up, but now notice how irresponsible this robot's being, because this clearly says this side up, and he is kind of moving it all over the place, and the arrow is not going the correct way. Now this is fine for some things. You might want the orientation, like a blaster or something like that, to always kind of be following where the hand is going. But in some cases, like a coffee cup, or in this example, you probably want that thing to stay vertical and stay in that one position. So to make that box stay upright, I would do 3 steps. First, I would make it independent. So I would select it. Click the little independence icon over here, the crown. Now remember, it has to be a group to do that. It can't be a layer. So in your Photoshop file, you would want it to be a group. Then I would take the staple tool down here, and I would staple it, which is going to attach it to the arm in a more attached, fixed way. And then for the attached style, with this box hold selected on the attached style, I'm going to set that to hinge. And those 3 steps are what it's going to take to have the box always stay up. Now, if I change this instead to weld, instead of hinge, look what happens. Then it's going to go to its side. But notice how it's not warping. It's kind of staying in the same place. The edges are staying kind of rigid. That's because it's its own independent part. It's not bound by the arm or the other bending of the character. That has absolutely no effect on how the box works. And as our previous example, if I turned all that stuff off and didn't have independence, now look what happens. Now it gets kind of wobbly, you can see, when you're moving it around, and the bending of the arm and you know the robot, it kind of affects the whole thing. And we can see that, remember this yellow line here that appears to the side shows us how things are connected. So in this case, the box is, you know, the warping of the box is determined by the arm, but when I make it independent, it's its own thing and it can kind of work on its own. So that's a pretty simple way to make a character pick objects up and drop them down. A lot of you are using external audio tracks to fuel your puppets, and that's the way that I do things a lot too. I'll get my wife or my kids or my friends to do a voice, and you know I'll either record it on my laptop or with my phone, voice recorder, and then bring that in and do the lip sync. But there may be a few extra steps that you may want to take to make sure your voice and your signal is as clear and loud as possible. And the clearer and louder the signal, the better probably that your lip sync results are going to be. So if you find that when you're bringing in external audio tracks, you're missing mouth shapes or things don't feel as loud and clear as possible, you may want to try some of these tricks. So I'm in Adobe Audition right now, and I just recorded this really short segment.
Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Okay, so that's pretty good. Well, the voice acting wasn't very good, but the general signal sounds pretty clear and okay. So what I'm going to do is first I'm just going to select this by pressing Command A on Mac or Control A on Windows to select everything. And then I'm going to go up to Favorites, and I'm going to do Hard Limit to -1 dB. And that's going to just boost all the signals to their loudest possible settings. So.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my...
And so that's not going to clip. It's not going to go all the way up, but it is going to really push it to that red line and get it as loud as possible. Now, depending on your preferences or setup, that may be too loud for you. So you actually have a few different options here. If you went into Effects, Amplitude and Compression, and Hard Limiter, you can really tweak these values. And maybe you want -3 or -6 or something like that. So you can really... I just noticed there's one called That's One Dead Horse, and I don't really know what that does, but there you go. Okay, so that's the first thing you can do is really boost that signal. So let's just bring that back up to -1. Okay, and then another thing I'll do is get rid of the background noise. So if I zoom in really close here, you'll notice in this case it's pretty low, but in other cases you may have an air conditioner in the background, or wind, or just crowd noise, or whatever, the rest of your office behind you. And I want to eliminate that so no extra visims get picked up. And so the way I would do that is just drag and select an area that you feel like is representative of kind of that background noise element. So you're not talking, but that background noise is there. And then you would go to Effects, Noise Reduction and Restoration, and go to, what is it here? Capture Noise Print. And that's going to capture that, kind of take a snapshot of that as, okay, this is the background noise that I want to eliminate. Then you're going to, again, select everything, go to Effects, Noise Reduction and Restoration, and do Noise Reduction Process. Now, generally, I just do this by the default, but you can, kind of tweak these to your liking and how much, you want to basically mix the noise with the silence, and press Apply. And that's going to basically get rid of a lot of that background noise. In this case, it's really not that extreme because there really wasn't that much going on in the background. I'm in a quiet office right now, but in other cases, I have been in louder situations, and this has really helped things feel a lot cleaner. So hopefully those two tips help you out getting clean audio, and then you can of course bring it into Character Animator. And so with my imported audio here, which I just did by File Import, shows up here. I just drag that into my scene. There it is. I select my character and go to Timeline, Compute Lip Sync from Scene Audio. And that will calculate all the lip sync based on the audio track that I've dragged into the scene. And now I've got a nice loud signal that's going to look really, really nice.
Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
You've probably seen tutorials in the past about adding dangle, adding physics to your character to make things move around, kind of create these secondary animations, hair swishing back and forth, or in this case, I want this robot's two switches on top to move around and kind of dangle and add a little bit of extra life to them. So the way I would normally do this is I would go into my character, and here I have each of these set up as a independent group. So I have my left antenna here and my right antenna here, and I would want to do two things probably to them. I would want to use the staple tool down here, staple where I want them to be connected to, and then use the dangle tool, this little pendulum thing, and point that where I would want gravity to be pulling on this particular part. I'll do the same thing for the left antenna. Staple it down where it connects to the character, and then add a dangle handle where I want weight to be pulling on it. Okay, so if I move into my character just by default, you'll notice these are moving around and they're looking okay. But what happens if I want to give multiple parts to a character different weight, different physics, kind of different strengths? Right now, if I did this and I went into the dangle parameter, I can fool around with the spring stiffness to make them kind of a little bit more wobbly or not. But this is a global parameter by default, and maybe I don't want these both, moving around at the same kind of strength. And so there is a way actually to give them their own physics properties, each of them individually. And I'll show you how to do that now. So let's jump back into the puppet. And the first thing I'm going to do is at the top here, I'm going to select this top level character all the way up the top of your layers list. And by default, when you import a character, we add all these behaviors to it. So all the things you know and love, eye gaze, face, lip sync, all of that stuff. However, I'm going to remove the dangle behavior by selecting this little menu icon and saying remove behavior. And then instead, I'm going to add two new instances of the behavior, and I'm going to add it to each of my antenna parts. So let's go down to behaviors here. Left antenna is selected, and I press plus and dangle. And this is dangle 1. I'm actually going to rename this to left antenna. And then with my right antenna, I'm going to do the same thing. Add a dangle there and rename this. Okay, so now if I go back to my scene, notice that I've got these two behaviors down here, left antenna and right antenna, that have been added to my scene. And these will allow me to control each of these individually. So let's say, for example, the left antenna, I don't want to move around as much. So one trick I could do is actually, instead of gravity pulling down on this one, I can actually twist this little dial to have gravity pulling up on it instead. And then you'll notice, it's going to not move around as much because gravity's pulling up instead of trying to push it down. So it's trying to float up, and I can even change and make gravity much stronger, and you'll see it starts to kind of move up as I do that. So you have a little bit of control there as to how much you want it to move around. And now you notice that one, the left antenna isn't moving much at all, and the right antenna is moving quite a lot. And so you could imagine imagine a character with a lot of different hair strands, and you could have different dangle, weights and movements to each individual hair strand if you wanted to. Or, if this guy had wires dangling off him, or a necklace, or a scarf. So if you have multiple dangles going on, and it feels like that one global parameter isn't working, try this technique out, and this will help you add a lot more life to your character, but have a lot more control over exactly how you do that. You guys have a lot of great ideas about where character animators should go, and we're giving you a better forum to be able to keep track of those ideas and hold us accountable for them. And that is this new ideas portal, feature request portal, as part of the Character Animator forum. So the way you get there is go to adobe.com/go/ch_wish, and I'll link to it in the video description below as well. But this is a place where you or anyone else in the community can submit and vote on the ideas that you want to see implemented in future releases of Character Animator. So it's really cool to see kind of where things could potentially go. So we're seeing a lot about, full body tracking, arm tracking, hand tracking, that sort of stuff. Having different emotion sets, being able to quickly change through those. Much better integration with After Effects, working with Animate CC, hand tracking, I said, being able to see waveform of imported audio and timeline. That's something I've wanted a lot. And you'll see we have things that we can actually respond to here. So this is actually a planned feature and will be implemented in a future version. Same with keyframe support, being able to keyframe certain parts of, moving a character around or that sort of thing is something we've wanted to do for a while. So anyway, it's interesting to go through these, and I would suggest everyone check this out and see if you have a great idea or something you would love to see implemented in Character Animator. If it's not already on this board, please submit it and let us know about it. We would love to see what everyone is the most interested in for the future of Character Animator, and we really want development to be driven by the community. We can decide what we think is best, or our bosses can tell us what they think is best. But this gives us a lot of great data as to what we should prioritize next. So check it out, and we would love to hear what you think. Thanks. If I had to pick the one body part in characters that people run into the most issues with, it would have to be the eyes. The eyes are pretty complicated. There's a lot of common issues that we see with this sort of thing. So here's kind of a really basic, simple walkthrough as to how to create eyes and how to test some, common issues that people may run into. So first off, always make sure that your eyes are inside of your head group and that they are called exactly left eye and right eye. And again, we're talking about the characters right and left, not the left and right side of the screen. If I twirl these open, I will see that I've got several different things here. Left eye is a group that includes left blink, left pupil. Left pupil is a group, so it's actually created this folder that has two things inside of it, but don't worry about that. Really, we only care about this one thing. Left eyeball, and then a shadow layer that's underneath of it. And same with the right eye. I've got the exact same thing, but instead of left, I put right at the beginning. Okay, so let's go through this step by step. So the eye in general, these eye groups that you've created in your Photoshop or Illustrator file, this kind of just encompasses everything within that eye shape. And so anything that is a part of your eye should be included in this eye tracking. And actually, if you go over to the tags section over here, and remember you can switch between visual and text-based tags. If you roll over top of any tag, it'll tell you exactly what this tag is used for, what behaviors use this tag. So in this case, I can see that the left eye tag is used both by the eye gaze and the face behavior. And so both of those are going to look at what is tagged left eye and use that information to do the tracking of the pupil and the whole eye movement. So helpful to kind of understand any of these different tags. If you go over them, it'll teach you what they're used for. Moving on to blink, by default I have this turned off and I just have a line, I should say hidden, make it invisible by toggling off the eyeball. But what blink is going to do, it's going to say when you blink in the webcam, just show this layer and hide everything else that's in the eye group. So in this case, it's saying when I blink, just show left blink and hide the pupil, hide the eyeball, and hide the shadow. And you could have anything else inside that group and it would also disappear. So that's, blinking is the most common issue we see is when people put blink outside of the eye group. And when you do that, it's going to make everything else in your head disappear and not your eye. So we really recommend keeping the blink inside that eye group. Next, we'll move on to the pupil. And a few things about the pupil. Number one, you want to make sure that it's independent. So add a little crown to it over there. And you can only add crowns to groups in Photoshop or Illustrator. So make sure it's a group in the first place. And if something isn't a group, by the way, you can always do it this way. Let's say, for example, I wanted to make my blink a group. You could always just select it and then go to Puppet, Group as Puppet. And that's going to change it into a group. And then you can add the little independent thing there. But in this case, I don't want to do that. So let's just undo those steps. And the reason we make it independent, again, is because we want our pupil to move around on its own and not warp the rest of the body or the face per se. We want it to be able to do its own thing. And you'll notice the interesting thing here is when this is selected, I actually have two things in the tag over here, and they're different colors. I've got left pupil is a yellow tag, and then left pupil size is a blue tag. And because I named this layer left pupil in my Photoshop or Illustrator file, these two tags were automatically applied to it. Now, why is this happening? So the first one, the left pupil, we see a yellow tag, and that is what we call a handle tag. And those are applied to handles. And remember, a handle is kind of like an invisible data point. And those are represented in Character Animator by these little circles that you see. So in this case, this is a double duty as the origin point for this pupil, and I can move around where I want that to be. But that is essentially a handle. So when you add fixed points, draggable points, sticks, all these things are handles. Now, and you'll notice if I select this circle, you'll notice that the other tag isn't showing up because that's a layer tag. The blue tags are layer tags, and this is only showing me relevant handle tags. So let's go back and just select the layer instead here, and you'll notice now left pupil size is also visible, and that's going to basically apply to this blue box that's surrounding the pupil, and that's saying how big is your pupil. And by default, by naming something left pupil, that got auto tagged as, hey, this is the default size I want. Now this one's a little confusing, but when you call something left eyeball or right eyeball in your Photoshop or Illustrator file, it gets tagged left pupil range. And that's essentially what your eyeball is, right? It's the confines of where your pupil is going to stay inside. You don't want it to be, moving outside of the bounds of your eyeball. So by default, naming something left eyeball or right eyeball will automatically tag it as your pupil range. Now, if you notice that your your pupil is moving outside of your eyeball, then probably something is being calculated or tagged in that pupil range that's not right. It's either too big or too small or something. So always check what that pupil range is, and you can play around with that. One thing that I've seen that sometimes fixes these mistakes is if I untag left pupil range here and instead do it for the eye. In this case, this is not going to work because I also have the shadow as part of the eye, and I don't want that to be calculated. But in some other limited cases, I have seen that work and help people with where their pupil is getting outside of the bounds of their eyeball. So that might be a fix for you. And then finally, I've got this element, the shadow element, as part of my eye. But the determination of do I put this in my eye group or not is basically, do you want this to appear and disappear when you blink or not? Now in this case, I do want that to disappear when I blink, and so I included it in my eye group. If I didn't want it to disappear, if I wanted that shadow to always be there and have the blink line still show up over top of it, I would want that shadow layer to be somewhere else in my puppet structure, maybe down in front of the head or this, the skin or the above the mouth or something like that, but not in the eye group if I want it to appear. So you can add whatever you want into the eye. It doesn't really matter. It just determines, do you want that to appear and disappear when you blink or not? And we've mentioned this in past tutorials, but a quick way to test your eyes and make sure they're working okay is under the eye gaze behavior to turn on arm mouse and touch input. And then as you drag the mouse around, you will affect the eyes moving around as well. And I would actually turn off camera input so you don't have that kind of polluting your signal. But then as you drag around, you will see, and in this case, my pupils are working really well and they are staying within the confines of my eyeball. So this is a great way to test and make sure everything's working right. So hopefully that's a good tutorial on how eyes work and will help troubleshoot some of the issues that we commonly see people have and make sure your eyes are as responsive and expressive as possible. All right, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. And as usual, if you have any questions, concerns, issues, can't rig a puppet correctly, heads are falling off, whatever, please post it on the official Character Animator forums and someone from the team will try to help you out. That's it for this month. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Have fun.